This week, in the security news, Claude leaks source code and new models. Two really smart people say AI is finding vulnerabilities better than ever. Windows is running your internet to send updates to strangers. Big IP APM vulnerability, all you need to know. Linux KVM for the win. The bus factor in open source. Axios supply chain breach. Trimming Grub. Depotting and hacking e-motorcycles. Trivy and Cisco source code leaks. And the FCC ban. Also, what is a router? All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Ever feel like your network infrastructure is stuck in the past? Meet Meter, the company reimagining what it means to get and stay online. Meter delivers full-stack networking, wired, wireless, and cellular, all in one seamless, scalable, and secure solution. From hardware design and firmware to software, deployment, and support, Meter streamlines every part of your network while giving you all the control and transparency you need. Whether you're managing a branch office, retail stores, or a massive data center, Meter gives you performance, reliability, and the visibility you need to stay in control. Thanks to Meter for sponsoring. Go to securityweekly.com/meter to book a demo now. That's securityweekly.com/meter, METER. Zero Trust is clearly the future as threats get faster, quieter, and harder to detect. But implementing it shouldn't disrupt the business. ThreatLocker enforces default deny and execution in a way that remains enterprise-ready, scalable, and operationally clean. Unknown software is stopped cold, trusted apps stay contained, and drift is locked down across the environment. It's Zero Trust that works in real enterprises and prepares you for the threats ahead. See why CISOs are adopting it at securityweekly.com/threatlocker. Coming to you from the Hacker Syndicate Studios, this is Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 920, being recorded on Wednesday, April 1st, 2026. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined by Mr. Sam Bound. Sam, welcome.
Good evening. Glad to be with you.
Miss Mindy Logan is here with us. Mindy, welcome.
Thank you so very much. It's awesome to see you all.
Hotel Larry is joining us. Larry Pesce, live from the hotel. What's up, Larry?
Yay, Hotel
nice.
Larry.
Good to have you.
Much. I'm actually in Orlando this week teaching for SANS and cut out to be able to come do this for a little bit and trying to reconfigure ham radio at the same time because I'm really close to the Artemis 2 launch and
Nice.
I want to see if I can pick up ground station. And they go up in
Nice.
15 minutes, allegedly.
G. Mark Hardy, special guest, has joined us. G. Mark, welcome.
Well, thank you. Greetings from my rental car studio here in South Lake Tahoe, where it's getting ready to have about, 6, 7, 8, 9 inches of snow. We'll find out by morning.
Nice. Very nice. G. Mark, what's the name of your podcast for our audience? The full name
Sure.
of your pod.
The podcast is CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader.
Wow, it's so weird because I listen to your podcast and then hear your podcast, your great podcast voice, G.
It's
Mark.
kind of fun. Yeah, we were at RSA this past week. We got to put that name drop in there because if we want to get our media passes next year, we have to make sure we mention them this year. There's people walked up to me, he's like, "Yeah, I didn't know what you looked like," or recognize that voice. So, I guess if you have a face for radio, it pays off.
That's it. Well, it's good to have you, my friend.
I think of it more from Hacker Jeopardy.
Yes,
That's
Hacker Jeopardy
true. A lot of
too.
years at Hacker Jeopardy.
Recognize
Somehow
that.
it's a little bit more creepy. It makes my spine grow a little bit more.
Yeah.
Johnny Glenpow has the exact same intonation, but he's doing a great job with the show.
Nice. We wanted to start by talking about the FCC router ban. I think I covered that in my story number 6, which is how to turn anything into a router. So just to set the stage, right? FCC has passed new regulations that any router, and that's the definition that we're calling into question, but any router after a certain date will not be authorized by the FCC unless special considerations are made, which was also kind of vague, which is kind of scary for me that FCC is banning something and there's a lot of this vagueness surrounding it, which is never a good thing. Josh Marpet, who was actually at the Eclipsium booth at RSAC, made a statement that TVs are routers, and the internet lost its mind, right? And this isn't the only piece of content where people are losing their minds over this regulation. And rightfully so, in some of these arguments, right? Because where the FCC has put down these kind of weird regulations. I just want to throw out or recognize rather the elephant in the room, and that is part of my take before I turn it over to our illustrious co-hosts, is that the security issues we have with these routers are largely focused on the firmware and or software inside of them. The security problem is not necessarily, maybe in very, very small amount or percentage of cases, related to the actual hardware being used, or more importantly, where that hardware is manufactured. Because let's face facts, it's all manufactured in China. So I think it did kind of a bad job of the details
Maybe
on
not
the
all of it.
FCC regulation. Larry, I know you've been following this very, very closely.
Yeah. So, Paul, first, let's talk about what the FCC ban is. And the FCC ban here in the US, FCC says that they will not certify any consumer grade router that is manufactured overseas. So they don't specify
They just say
China.
overseas.
They say basically, right. So basically, anywhere that is not onshored, they will ban. They will not approve for sale.
Like Mexico and Canada
US.
is fine. Because
Yeah.
technically,
Mexico-
Exactly. I was going to say, not Hawaii, not Guam.
right?
Yeah.
Well, Canada is overseas. We
Rico,
talked to Jeff.
yep.
Canada is
Jeff,
overseas.
for Jeff, it's overseas. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically what's happening here is they're sort of going along with what happens with the drones. No overseas manufactured drones unless you apply for an exemption. And they are not doing a company by company exemption. They are doing a product SKU by product SKU exemption. So if you want, it's much like they do for the radio certification type of stuff. Every product that you want to bring into the US that transmits, you have to have a radio certification done, and it's on a device by device basis. So let's say what is it? Ubiquity has 3 different router models that they want to bring in, want to sell next year. They have to have each one of those put on the list independently for independent evaluation. Now, the other one too here is that there is some documentation about how to get on that approved list for each one of your models, and the approved list has questions like, where is your router manufactured? And it could be China, it could be Vietnam, it could be South Korea, it could be Singapore, where a lot of this stuff is coming from. And then the other questions are, what are your plans for onshoring that within the next 5 years? Yeah. So as it stands right now, and let me also clarify, this is also for new models that are to be offered for sale. Whatever is here now, and whatever models are for here in the United States that have been certified by the FCC can continue to be sold, even though that they may be their supply chain is overseas. So it's all new stuff.
Larry, was there something in there about firmware updates for existing models?
Yes. And there's still a little bit of discussion around that, and I'm still learning a little bit more about that. So yeah, as it stands right now, everything that is here is fine. But as of March 2027, And my understanding is that if your firmware is developed outside of the United States, it is not allowed to be pushed or made available to your customers to update routers.
Oh, that just, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously
So
what everyone's thinking is that makes security worse, right? Because now there's no incentive. If your firmware is developed in China and it's March 2027, there's no incentive. They'll just end of life it and just not make any new firmware and just keep selling it, right? Can they keep selling it? If it's already here, they can keep selling it, right?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So, I mean, arguably, it feels like the ban is trying to do two things. One is to try to prevent hardware backdoors in the supply chain, so everything is done here in the U.S., when in fact the hardware backdoor problem is the least of the worries.
Virtually non-existent on consumer IoT or routers, right? I mean, we've seen hardware backdoors in Cisco.
Right. Wait,
Right,
I have
but
a
the
question
intent
on
here
that
is
then,
like-
though, because now if we're talking about what constitutes a router, are you saying that across all devices, like all IoT devices? Because if we're going to go
Well,
back to that, well, is it being defined as something that passes packets? So are there going to be backdoors in refrigerators and whatnot?
Let's table the
yeah.
what is a router thing, because the FC we need to fix that. Yeah, that's
That's
one thing we
routers
need to
conversation
fix.
here.
But
Yeah. So hardware backdoors are probably the least part of the problem, but it really feels like it's basically a push to do a lot of onshore manufacturing. And as it looks right now, there is a total of one router manufacturer that is not produced overseas.
they must be having a big party right now.
Basically, that means we will.
Or they're terrified, or they're
Well, do you know who?
No,
you know
I
who it
do
is?
not know who it is.
Oh crap! Why is that? Why am I
Look at
drawing a
who
blank?
all did all the inside
Starlink.
design in the last
Starlink.
couple days before it went out.
Yep. Starlink is the only U.S. router manufacturer.
Now have they clarified but have they
Could it
clarified
be?
if you buy a chip from China, like let's say the SOC, right? Most of the SOCs, system on a chips, that are included in and used by these IoT based routers, right? Larry and I wrote the book in 2007, so we're intimately familiar with common components that are used in these devices. One is the SOC, typically manufactured in specifically Taiwan, right? I don't know if almost 100% of your SOCs that are included in consumer-based routers are manufactured in Taiwan. If I get the SOC from Taiwan and then I manufacture everything else here in the U.S., am I still going to have trouble with this ban if I disclose to FCC, well, we bought the SOC from Taiwan?
Yeah, I mean, and that's really the question, right? Because where else are you going to buy them from? I mean, how many chip fabs are there here in the United States?
Not very many.
I can think of
I was going to say
two.
3, but
I can think of two. NVIDIA has one, and it's not complete yet.
It takes a long time to build.
And the other one is Eagle Electronics.
And they take a long time to build.
Yep. The other one is and they're expensive. So, now this is my opinion and my opinion only. This part has feels of, all right, we'll grant you the temporary exemption to be able to sell your new routers in the US for 18 months. But you have to start demonstrating that you are looking to onshore your manufacture to the US. So now all these companies are probably going to get together to build chip fab here in the US. They're going to spend millions of dollars to bring it onshore. And then maybe we give them another renewal for another 18 months. So we're talking 3 years.
But we're talking
at this point.
at least 5
and
years.
Then, I'm
right?
sorry.
Is it at least 5 years to spin up a new fab?
Hold on,
roughly? I mean, I don't know.
But maybe they're going to hurry. Maybe they're going to hurry. It's their best investment to hurry. So let's just say it's 36 months, and which will be in maybe right around the inside of the current administration. And I'm not trying to make this political, but now it becomes okay. We're not going to renew it after 36 months, but you've invested all this money in this chip fab here in the U.S. So what do the companies do? They sell it at fire sale prices to other companies in the US. And now we've made America great again because now we have all this chip fab here in the US that we got really cheap. And it feels like we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it.
Yeah. Yep. That's what it feels like. No.
I am not intended to make this political.
No, I think it's a highly likely scenario for sure. But also, where my brain goes is think about the millions of chips that we need, right? Because it's not just one chip per router. I gave the example of a sock. All of us know there's other chips on the router, and one of those critical chips, it may be on the sock or it could be separate, but you need your Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, you need your Ethernet controller, you need some SPI flash or eMMC on there. There's lots of chips that you need, but when you're talking about consumer-based routers, like go do the market research and just query your favorite LLM and ask it, like, how many millions of devices are sold by TP-Link, Netgear, D-Link, Linksys, and whatever other popular Ubiquity.
Cisco.
It's millions and millions of devices, which is why they're relying on an established chip fab source like Taiwan. And what's the big chip fab in Taiwan? There's like one big company in Taiwan. I can't remember the name of it. What is it called, G-Mark?
Yeah.
TSMC.
TSMC.
Yeah, TSMC.
But I mean, they're cranking out.
Now,
you do the research. How many millions of chips are they cranking out? Like, you're not just going to replace that by doing it here in the US. I mean, it's not feasible. It's not possible.
Right. Now, Paul, that is just assuming integrated circuits and all those SoCs. It's not well defined. So this could also be all of the other components, capacitors, resistors, connectors, cases,
right?
The metal enclosures, the antennas.
One could argue that
specify
capacitors, resistors, the actual board itself has pretty much zero impact on security. Maybe safety. Like, I'll give them that. Maybe safety, certainly. And I mean, we've seen the analysis of various electronics devices that not all capacitors and resistors are made equal, right? And I mean, if you're an audiophile like myself, that's a huge upgrade. And I see people restoring old audio gear, right, and replacing the caps is a huge thing. But it's a passive, passive device. Again, it's the vague language from the FCC, right? One of the things I think they should clarify is passive versus active.
So let's jump back to that firmware problem again. Because again, as part of this ban, they're saying, no firmware can be pushed to devices unless it's developed in the US after March 2027. Like, the problem that they are trying to solve is really given the hammer for the hardware, which is not the security problem. And then they're trying to solve the problem of all these Volt Typhoons and all these types of stuff, which the real problem there is hardware devices that the security issue was with software, the firmware, that have been end-of-lifed by the manufacturer. Like, we can't get parts to manufacture these things anymore. They have reached their end of useful life, so we are not doing software support for them anymore. And it's been a decade. Like, these are devices that got hacked as part of all of this stuff that, oh my God, they're hacking government employees working from home and getting stuff on 10-year-old unsupported devices. And arguably, this is the problem they're trying to solve.
But they're not solving it.
But you're not allowing us to do software updates to solve this problem.
Because they didn't talk to us, right? They didn't talk to us. This is what happens when regulation is passed without engaging with a community of experts. Because I believe one of the things we would have told them, like, look, you want to improve the security of consumer-based routers here in the US. One thing you could do is you mandate that once you sell a device in the US, you got to maintain the firmware forever, right? I mean, I'm not saying that maybe is a right or wrong thing, but just throwing that out there, you want to address the problem. You make them fix all the security issues for life of a device here in the US, right? You want to go to extremes. They went to the extreme of, well, everything has to be manufactured here in the US. But as we've already established, that's not going to move the needle. What would move the needle if you said, hey, go back to all your devices. Guess what? All that stuff you end of life, you now have to support or face fines as the stick.
So I have a question. Like, how does that play in? Because my understanding when you're talking about the radio certifications and how that this came from that, wasn't locking that down and locking down the firmware was so that the radios wouldn't operate outside of what they were certified to operate as.
Well, that's
So
certainly one control. Yep.
One
okay,
component.
so if you're saying now,
Yep.
like to continue,
So
I'm
yeah.
sorry. Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, no, and I think. Oh, Mandy, go ahead. I want you to finish your thought on this.
So, well, I'm going back to what Paul is saying. So, if you're talking about having constant firmware updates for whatever device has been sold, then wouldn't that just require locking down that the firmware wouldn't adjust what the router was certified to do?
I mean, that's one aspect. I think what I would put in the regulation would be you have to address all known security issues with it. Now, that carries with it a lot of interesting issues, down the line. And speaking from someone who has disclosed vulnerabilities in these, small Linux-based computing devices, like right now, it's a decent, it varies, but there's a pretty decent response when it comes to fixing them. However, if they had to fix all known security issues, if I go, this is now a known security issue, they're going to say, no, it's not, right? They're going to maybe have a lot more pushback when security researchers disclose things because they don't want to have to fix it because it costs them money. So, that's an interesting, the incentives are very interesting in this conversation. And that's one where we could run into this issue of incentives. G-Mark.
Let me throw something in here. If we do a risk analysis based upon, for example, Paul, some of the vulns you've found, what could you do wrong with the router? Obviously, send packets where they're not supposed to go or duplicated or whatever. But if you think about an FCC transmitter, which goes ahead and puts out either too much RF energy or it goes on the wrong channel, it gets into somebody else's band, that's pretty well layer 1 type of a problem. But we're talking here about layer 3 problems. And so it's a different type of issue for the FCC to look at, who typically looks at layer 1. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's
yes,
right. Like they stepped into a big pile of doo-doo, right? That many of us have tried to define in our industry and say, what are the minimum security standards for, let's just say, a consumer-based router, right? And the EU has regulations that help define that, but it gets into muddy waters, right? Like, what is a vulnerability? Which security controls should they have? Must they have? How do we write that language? There's certainly a list in my head of things I believe all firmware-based devices, such as consumer-based routers, should have in terms of security. One of the big things that I always push for in our latest disclosure was you need to have cryptographic firmware signature validation in the device. That helps. Now, does it help the crappy web management interface that has, authentication bypass and command injection? Absolutely not. It does not. That's much harder, but certainly achievable because these are definable things, right? That we can say this is a vulnerability. And it comes down to incentives. The manufacturer should be incentivized to provide a secure platform. And the question is, how do you do that? I've put forth proposals to put that on the burden of the ISPs, right? Have the ISPs have pre-approved routers with air quotes secure firmware, and then have an incentive program that users can adopt those. And there's an incentive to the ISP from the government. There's an incentive by the user of the ISP to get those new devices. I think something like that would work. Difficult to scale, but I think there are much better solutions to other than what the FCC has proposed, obviously. Larry, your thoughts on this problem that you and I have thought about since the dawn of time?
I want to, I think I want to jump back a little bit to the root of what G-Mark was getting there. FCC, their mandate and their approval process has really been around layer 1 about the radio frequency crap stuff. And effectively what's being done here is the FCC says that they will fail to certify a device, and their stick is around the radio part. but they're now lengthening that stick to deal with where the hardware is manufactured. And they're arguably maybe exceeding their mandate a little bit. And it's not the first time that this has happened. For doing RF jamming attacks, RF layer 1, they have full reign for some of this type of stuff. But they have prosecuted folks for doing denial of service attacks at layer 2. So arguably exceeding their mandate for some of that type of stuff. And why did they do that? Because they needed someone to be the enforcement arm at layer 2 when there was
that, Larry, sorry, that was for
now they're
disruption of service. And I believe you're referring to like rogue AP detection that was built into some of the manufacturers' systems and ecosystems.
Or just people launching DOF attacks against wireless networks in hotels and that type of stuff. So, not the first time they've exceeded their mandate. This time they're diverting from their mandate to, hey, we have the authority to approve or reject these devices being sold in the US because they don't meet these RF standards. And now they're going to do it because they don't meet these manufacturing standards. And then maybe even on the software standards as well. So it's arguably the same stick. It's just a matter of where they're whacking it. And, maybe they're whacking it outside of their lane a little bit here. But with the layer 2 stuff, it was like they were the enforcement arm because no one else was willing to pick it up. And I think the FCC is kind of being made like the scapegoat for this type of stuff because they're willing to pick it up, because they have that enforcement arm capable. And there's really nobody left to sort of pick it up. And Paul, you made the comments about like nobody consulted with us. Like, you're right. And when this thing came out, that fact sheet, that first thing in the morning that day, like we were hearing from folks from other government agencies that would normally be in the know about this type of stuff. Like they were like, what the hell is this? This is the first time I'm hearing about this. They had no idea.
They could have consulted CISA, would have been a logical place. Of course, CISA's funding is cut, and
that would require people still working.
Exactly my point. Exactly the point I was trying to make. Right, NSA has offered guidance on these types of issues, such as UEFI and other things. That could have been another great avenue for them to explore. It seems like they just did this in a bubble for seemingly just political reasons, right? And I've said this before so often we get new laws and or regulation that are based on just politics and politicians trying to appeal to their base, right? And I think this is a situation where China bad. So if we pass regulations or laws that supports people that think China's bad, more people will vote for us. And that's how, in our state, as an example, we can't have plastic straws or plastic bags at the stores, right? It's just ridiculous legislation that is not grounded in reality or safety, for that matter, or science or any facts. It's just they're feel-good measures, and that's what this feels like.
Well, I'm going to have to wrap up here because you talk about risk assessments and things, and I've left my wife at the bar for the last half hour unattended, and she knows where I sleep tonight, so that would be kind of a dangerous thing to persist that. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate, at least in the first half hour.
Yes, and, thank you, G-Mark.
Yeah, you know what the logical extension, if we've gone from layer 1 to 2 and then to 3, is it going to go all the way up to layer 7 someday, and all of a sudden we've got the thought police coming out of the FCC? And then also look at Tim Brown when he was dealing with the SEC and what was considered to be an overreach, which was successfully defended, but at great personal and economic cost to be able to push that back down. So I will concur with you that a lot of government agencies, by either political reason or others, will push the envelope. They'll try to see what they could do, and then they wait for either industry to roll over and say, okay, the court system to go ahead and pull them back in, or some politician from another persuasion to try to go ahead and counteract that. But that's a dynamic, and we're going to have to live within that system. I don't see it going away. In fact, I probably see it getting a little bit more intrusive or robust as we go forward.
Yeah, I agree. Great insights, G-Mark. Thanks for joining us, my friend. We'll invite you back next time when you're in your studio as well, and it can stick for the whole time. So.
Well, I think you guys are too cynical suggesting they do this just to get votes. It's a lot simpler. When you have an agency enforcing rules that make no sense, they just approve whoever bribes them.
Yep. I mean, I live in Rhode Island, man. You're speaking my language, right? Very small state. Everyone knows everyone, and that breeds corruption. Is my assessment of what happens, right? This is happening on a much more grandiose scale, but the same principles apply here 100%. Josh took a lot of flack on the internet for defining what a router is, and there is documentation on what a router is. And I pulled that from, they say it should be defined by the National Institute of Science and Technology's internal report 8425A to include consumer-grade networking devices that are primarily intended for residential use and can be installed by the customer. Routers forward data packets, most commonly IP packets, between network systems. And people are debating this definition, and Josh gave the example as a TV. Now, let me just, before you like flambe Josh, which has already happened, by the way, in the YouTube comments, but a TV is a consumer grade networking device. It is can route packets, got Wi-Fi and Ethernet, so it has two network interfaces on it, can be installed by the consumer, capable of doing the routing, not maybe out of the box, right? Which is where I think we need further clarification by the FCC on the intent of the device to further classify these, but it can certainly be configured this. I think the interesting point is this. If a device has two or more network interfaces and runs an operating system such as Linux, it's only one command away from being a router. Sudo syscontrol -w net IPv4 -IP or .IP_forward equals 1. And magically, through the kernel, that system is now a router. So classified routers, we need a much better definition from the FCC and other governing bodies. Otherwise, things such as your phone is a router. When you tether or hotspot your phone, 100% that is a router. And this definition to me is too broad. And could, then you got people that, like, as this moves forward, you think about how they might get around this. Is a Raspberry Pi, is that a router? Nope, it's a single board computer, right? And maybe it comes down to how they market it, right? Anything can be turned into a router. That was my story number 6, how to turn anything into a router. Again, you just need more than one network interface in a Linux kernel and one command, and magically it's a router. So before you flambe Josh, this is what Josh was trying to address in the very, very short clip that was posted to actually Eclipsium's YouTube channel. I get all the I could just keep getting notifications. There's a new comment, and so every once in a while on my screen I see Josh is a moron. I'm like, stop doing that to my friend. Damn it.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, pretty much everything is a router.
And go ahead, Larry.
Yep. He's not wrong. And yeah, and like I don't know if we talked about the quote big news, and maybe I'll spoil it for Josh a little bit here, but Josh got a new job not that long ago, and
Josh works for Finite
awesome.
State with you now, Larry.
Yeah. Yep, he sure does, and he's awesome to work with, a super smart dude, and he believes that a TV is a router, and me too.
Yeah. I agree.
Yep. I stand
right?
with Josh Mark.
We need T-shirts now, right?
Agreed.
That says that, and I'm concerned about the small board computer thing too, like Raspberry Pis, and again, I can see companies doing weird things with how they're marketed, and will they get in trouble if they market something, I should say a Raspberry Pi, as like, this is a computer, it's not a router. But then they have instructions somewhere, or someone posts instructions, here's how to turn it into a router. How would we regulate that? And then if major companies that sell these consumer-based routers catch on to that, maybe they're not selling routers anymore. They're selling small computers. And then via some firmware update, magically you can turn it into a router. Like we as people will, and especially hackers, find ways to overcome and find loopholes in a lot of these things. Will the FCC catch on to that and further tighten down, or maybe loosen some of the restrictions?
Well, by the way, if this leads to my story 16, in case you think only the red people are doing this, the blue people have already done it. Now in California, every computing operating system has to collect your age and report it to a central server. And that would presumably apply to your TV and your router and everything else that's running an operating system. And the open source community has already begun to rebel and say, we'll just not let our product be used in California.
There's big companies like Canonical that they haven't come out and said, we're just going to ignore this because it's ridiculous. But that's like essentially, if you read between the lines and what their legal team has publicized, that's kind of Canonical's stance. Canonical is one of the major Linux companies that's out there today, and they're kind of leading the charge to be like, this is so ridiculous that there's like, oh, we'll take it under consideration, right? But there's no plan because it's just so ridiculous. Who cares? Who cares what your age is?
I'd say it's actually not ridiculous. Well, I think everyone does care more and more. They want to age gate pornography and social media and maybe games and stuff. So it's getting to the point where anything that accesses the internet is expected to know your age. And that's not completely foolish.
Putting the age requirement on intent is irresponsible and morally wrong, right? And because I think that's like one of the underlying reasons perhaps of this law is that underage kids are going to act irresponsibly. Therefore, we need to gate this technology until they become adults. And I think that's completely wrong.
I don't think it's any different than age gating consumption of alcohol. How's it any different than that?
Well, I mean, that could be a safety issue. And I think the debate is there a safety issue in gating technology, right?
There's considerable evidence for that. That's the whole point of Jonathan Haidt for the last 10 years, that social media in particular is a physical safety issue for teenage girls. So that's the argument.
And one could argue we need better monitoring and oversight of children, not necessarily gating and laws, right? Maybe better tools for...
Well, that's what we do with alcohol and cars.
Yeah, and I think... But as many will argue, and I'll take the stance, like it comes down to the parents too, right? Parents have to be parents, and as parents, you got to keep your children safe from things like alcohol and driving and all that kind of stuff. And I think there's cases where that if you do it well as a parent, it's looked upon favorably. I'll give you an example. My oldest son got into some car accidents, as probably like. If you didn't get into a car accident when you first started driving, right? Like you're probably an anomaly. Everyone does. And when so if you're under 18 in Rhode Island, you have to go to court when you get into an accident. It's like an automatic citation, got to show up for a judge. And a parent can come with you. Not allowed to talk. You're just recognized. And after going twice with my son, who drives much better now, by the way, but after doing it twice and hearing everyone else's case right before me, those that showed up with their parents, they were kind of like dismissed very easily, quickly. Here's your fine. Like your parent has oversight there. So therefore, as like the law, we're not going to drop the hammer down, right? Kids that showed up without their parents, there was a lot more questioning, maybe more fines, maybe driver retraining because there was no parental oversight. So I think we can, as much as I want to complain about the laws in Rhode Island, that process, I think, was very good. And perhaps we need that with technology as well. And, kids, I think, should be exposed to technology with oversight, right? Not gated or banned. Because what happens when you gate or ban something? People are just going to get around it. I mean, look at Prohibition. They tried to ban alcohol completely. Yep. All that did was strengthen the mafia here in the U.S. So.
Yeah, you gate or ban something, and all it does is becomes more desirable because you're told you can't have it.
Right.
Well, I think you got a point that the technical fix will be useless. It's just going to be like the cookie pop-up. Are you over 18? Just click yes.
Exactly. I agree.
Well, I'm curious then, on a genuine curiosity. So thinking on systemically, neurologically, how a human develops, and that certain things don't develop until mid to late 20s. So the individual, that person, that meat suit, needs to recognize that delaying until they're fully formed can be actually extremely beneficial. Also, making sure they're developing other social skills, developing other things that they are at a point of being able to make conformed consent to what they are seeing. So, why would that not be beneficial for development of society long term?
Yeah, I think it's a balance.
It's a really great question.
I love when the youth of today is curious about technology, and we as technology practitioners can enable those folks to go do it. I mean, Sam, you teach, right? And I think it's rewarding for us to take someone who has that curiosity and that drive to learn more, to go, hey, you can go download Linux and you can go learn and explore, all this stuff. And to see how they interact with that, I think is really rewarding, and to see their learning process and maturity in it. But obviously every kid is different, right? So
I don't teach attack to high school students.
There is a maturity, but there are high school students that are mature enough to handle that, right? I think every kid matures at a different rate.
Yeah. Well, the ones that go to college early, I teach it there.
Yep. Alrighty, where do we want to go from here? We got to talk about AI. So I'm trying to find Thomas Tachek's article because it relates to one of your articles. Vulnerability research is cooked is my story number 5. I think it's interesting. Thomas Tachek, he wrote this amazing article, how basically AI has progressed to a point where it's interesting. A thought just occurred to me. AI has really, at this point, and I agree with Thomas, basically has made all bugs are shallow now with the AI. Like, it has increased our ability to find vulnerabilities and bugs exponentially and pretty accurately, very accurately, as the models mature. It's funny to see some of the younger folks want to poke holes at Thomas's article, like not knowing who Thomas is and how amazingly smart and experienced Thomas is. They have no idea who Thomas is. And I'm like, you have no idea who's writing this article. Like, Thomas is one of the smartest people in our field. And if you don't believe me, go listen to Security, Cryptography, whatever. And you'll also be amazed because the other hosts like Deidre are probably equally as brilliant, if not more, in certain areas than Thomas. Deidre just continues to impress me with her, like, off-the-cuff knowledge on cryptography. She is just amazing on that subject. I mean, she is so quick to bring up and ask smart questions, and she shows a command for that subject matter that is just amazing. So huge plug for that podcast. I should have worn the t-shirt because I actually have one of the t-shirts because I love the show so much. They also, on a tangent note, they did an episode where they AI generated presidents and did an entire podcast. Did you listen to that one, Sam? Now I forget what the subject matter was, but it's Trump, Obama, and Biden, and Clinton pipes in as well, and they're debating some topic of cryptography. It's one of the most amazing podcasts I've ever listened to, because it's so, like, the AI they use is so well done, and, like, not only is the subject matter accurate and on point, but the personalities of each president is also on point. So it's one of my, like, must listen podcast episodes so far this year, 100%. So Thomas brings up a lot of great points, right? AI vuln research is imminent, not gradual. And Sam, that's basically the long and the short of it is AI is just, it's gonna knock it out of the park when it comes to spotting vulnerabilities. And where many of us, myself included, are using it to find vulnerabilities a lot at a much faster pace now. And you had an article, Sam, is similar, right?
Oh, yeah, I got 2 of them, my 1 and 2, basically. Anthropic just accidentally leaked their upcoming model Claude mythos, and their discussion that they regard it as so dangerous that they're reluctant to release it because it finds some vulnerabilities so fast and can write code so fast that you can take over boxes really quickly with it, which is what we're seeing. And it's essentially the same thing that the Linux kernel maintainers said. They said until recently they were getting flooded with junk vuln reports from AI, but suddenly the AI bug reports are good. They're not always high severity bugs, but they're real bugs, and the patches are good patches. So we seem to have passed through a significant leap forward in the quality of AI code analysis and writing.
It's interesting to think about if you're the producer of that software, why you would not use these technologies. But it's interesting to look back in history because the technologies we use to find bugs aren't always adopted by the folks making the software, right? We've had this debate since the beginning of time. So let's just say I have firmware, but I don't have the source code. But I can also have either a physical or virtual instance of that. So I've got the binary firmware that I can unpack, and I've got an actual instance of it, whether that be virtual or whether that be a physical appliance. My kind of thing now is we can harness Claude code to go find vulnerabilities. If you have the source code, so I gave the example in Jet KVM and Nano KVM, their source code is all open source. So you have the source code, you have the binary firmware, and you can get the actual device. If you harness Claude code and go find me vulnerabilities. Now, I'm not saying that's how you prompt it, but your prompts are more detailed than that. You can discover vulnerabilities. And my Jet KVM disclosures are a direct result of using Claude in that way. And I think now today, like it is hard for us as researchers and security folks to even keep up with the AI technology. If you were to harness that, we can find bugs all day long. I'm confident now we can find bugs all day long. I would much rather the manufacturers or producers of that software to already have that, right? Make our jobs harder. Make our jobs harder. Because if you're not doing that, someone else is going to. But that's every technology that we've used to find bugs.
Well, realistically, the developers are not going to be able to use it until it's a commercial product that they can just install and run, and that's a few years behind these early research findings.
Agreed. I think that's where it's going to end up, and I think that was the point of Thomas's article. That vulnerability research is cooked.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, your companies like Checkmarks are going to have to build this into their product, and then everybody will be using it.
And then now you're talking about researchers to have to go back to, we have to find the things that the AI can't, or AI can assist us in finding those things.
Yeah. And that was what there was a talk at RSA about that. A guy pointing out that now that the Chinese are using AI to immediately exploit vulnerabilities and get in within 1 day of the patch, the defenders need to up their game to use AI to defend equally quickly, but that will take time to spin up because defense is harder and you have cumbersome processes and, you have to get your tooling and processes up to that speed. And
it's a great point, Sam. Wow, it's an amazing point because when I, as a security researcher, use AI, there is zero operational risk, right? I can build that in a VM. I can put Claude in a VM. And if both those VMs blow up, I can revert the snapshot and start over, and there's zero operational risk. However, if I'm using AI to go find the vulnerable systems and apply patches, does that carry some serious operational risk along with this? So that the deck is not stacked in the defender's favor in this example. Yep.
It never has been. Attack is always much easier than defense.
100%.
Yeah.
Speaking of attacks, yeah.
Hey, I got about 5 minutes left.
What do you want? What do you want to cover, Larry?
Pick something good.
Oh, I want to talk about. Well, in your 5 minutes,
I don't even have the show notes up in front of me.
There's a new BLE tool called GAT tool. Did you see this one?
GAT. No.
Yeah, about 3 weeks ago, it's a full-featured Rust implementation of the deprecated Blues GAT tool utility for interacting with Bluetooth low-energy devices via the generic attribute profile, or GAT. So character-for-character identical output of the original tool, modern Blues dbus API, written in Rust. It adds enhanced features for scanning device discovery, enumeration, and MAC spoofing, and other things. I assume this person used
Interesting.
vibe coding to create this, which is fine with me. I hope they did, right? Because I think it would actually, today's world produces better code, in my opinion. But it's 100% written in Rust, and something I want to check out. And but Larry, I think this is a trend. A lot of new Bluetooth low energy tools are being created, largely because we've got the power of AI. They can go read the spec. They can go read previous projects, right? That's how I set it up. Like, go read the spec, go read these projects. Now let's go create something new. You created one. Dave Kennedy created one.
Yeah.
Right?
So this is interesting. I've met Hacknar before through CactusCon. Smart dude. And the comments here is that, which is interesting, is that he says that the original GAT tool was removed from the Blues utilities in 2017, but remains one of the most referenced BLE tools in documentation, tutorials, and security research. Which the irony is, today was Bluetooth Low Energy Day and Bluetooth Day in Sec 617 for SANS, and we use GAT tool, and it is still included for whatever version of Blues that we are installing on that virtual machine. So I also heard that, like, the Blues utilities were going away completely in 2017, but they're still there, and people are using them, and they're still available. Yeah, I mean, so I get that if it went away, that we need a replacement, because it's pretty decent. But I used it today. Like, I didn't use GRAT tool. I used GAT tool.
Cool. But what I think is interesting is there are, in Larry, you and I have been down this road so many times. There are utilities or programs that we use that aren't necessarily maintained after a certain point, that we still like to use, that have their use case to help us achieve our milestones and goals in whatever work that we're doing, whether it be pen testing or security research. They could use a refresh. And I think Claude Code is perfectly poised in arming us as a community to help update these tools, right? So this person was like, you know what? I want to take the original implementation of a tool, I want to rewrite it in Rust, and I want to add some features. If you give Claude, again, like the specs and source code of an original tool, it's got so much of a great starting point to go create something that's more robust, more efficient, more performant. Like, one of my favorite things to do with Claude is, like, hey, we've coded this thing up to a point. I'm like, go look for bugs, go look for performance improvements, create me a plan to go fix them, and let me review it. Now, do I accept every single one? Usually not. I'll make modifications to it as I go. But I find it's gotten much better at going, like, we can have a performance increase here. We can fix this bug here. I think it's great to refresh all of those. I mean, look at how many GitHub projects that we rely on to do security research, pen testing, or even defense today in security. There's probably millions, and not all of those are maintained. And this is a great way to do it, because, again, we're lazy. Most of us are lazy programmers, myself included. And Claude is kind of reinvigorating in taking away some of that hard, tedious work that we need to do something like this. And I think the result is we're going to get better tooling, more updated tooling that does its job better, and maybe with some more better and enhanced features.
Nice. So, and this is great, because I was looking through this, and I was looking to see if, hey, we make this tool better, because that was kind of the deal. Like, hey, we're going to take GAT tool and we're going to make it better. And there's one thing that I see that needs some improvement where GAT tool sucked. And I'm like, I think I'm going to turn Claude Code against this and have it write an improvement and write a pull request.
This is
for it to do that thing that I literally complained about last day.
This is so amazing. This is one of the most exciting things for me, I think, about vibe coding right now. Is exactly this. It's taken away the boring, tedious work in helping us overcome some of those hurdles that may have stopped us from submitting a pull request and making that a reality. And amazing that the models have reached a point where it's writing so much better code. I think I was telling Josh about it in one of the projects that I'm working on in Claude Code. This is, when I started, it was a command line tool. And man, did I burn through tokens and trying to do that in previous models. And then just today, I turned Claude Code loose on that exact project that I vibe coded. And I was like, I'm like, this project needs an API. Can you just go code an API into it and write all the documentation? It's like, yeah, sure. Absolutely great. Like literally maybe 20 or 30,000 tokens later, I had an API, right? Think about how much work that is in previous to, there's some things that can help you automate it, right? But this was literally way less than an hour I had an API. And I was like, you know what? I think this project needs Jira integration. Can you go code that? It was like, sure, I'll go code Jira integration. And I'm like, it's just amazing how much better it's gotten in the Opus 4.6 model.
Yeah. It's funny when you were talking about that, Paul, about the number of tokens you went through to make that happen. I'm here at Sands Orlando, and I spent some time with Jeff McJunkin. And he's got like a side quest he's working on, and I'm going to leave him to talk about what that side quest is, because it's really freaking cool, and it's for some bug bounty type of stuff. But he's like spending a ton of money on tokens, and he got wind the other day that Quen 3.6 was going to be released on Open Router. And as part of the sort of beta testing to validate that they had gotten the model implemented well, they were going to give away free tokens for a period of time. And he used 88 million tokens in the first night.
Wow.
That's
That'd
a lot
be
of tokens.
awesome. Oh my goodness.
Now, I learned this week that your API tokens are a separate bucket with Claude. Because one of the other things I built into my tool is like, you know what? I'm like, can you go implement an LLM integration with yourself? Because that would be awesome. And so I talked about this tool, right? So I do a search for a CVE, and it gives me a whole bunch of information from some local databases that I'm curating on it, which works great. But I'm like, I really need you to, like, based on that CVE, go do a query to an LLM. And I'm like, I want you to go find all the threat actors and IOCs that are associated with this CVE to help improve my workflow. And it built an API integration with Claude. And it didn't work the first time. And I was like, why didn't that work? It's like, oh, you don't have any tokens associated with your account. I'm like, but I have the $100 a month Claude. It's like, no. That's separate. Just going to give me some extra money. And it's not that much at all for these API tokens. I think I gave it $100, and that's like millions and millions and millions of tokens. And so it built this LLM integration in, and it is working right now. Not quite where I want it. I've still got a little tuning to do, but it's working and helping me automate my workflows, which is just fantastic. So I didn't know that was a separate bucket, but it is.
Hey, Paul, it's a separate bucket.
Yep. Fortunately, not a very expensive one, which is good. Somewhere right now, an attacker is testing the parts of your app your security tools cannot reach. The authenticated areas, the login flows, the hidden functionality behind credentials. Secure AI Navigator changes that. It automatically navigates real login flows just like an attacker would, exposing vulnerabilities and data leaks hiding behind authentication across user roles, session states, and authenticated API calls. No scripts to write, no brittle automation to maintain, just complete coverage in minutes instead of days. Because we didn't test behind login are the worst words in an incident report. Learn more at securityweekly.com/NowSecure. The other thing that I was doing that relates to Claude, I had an article about installing QEMU KVM libvirt on Linux. So recently I've completely converted from VMware to KVM on Linux, and I'm happy. My tips if you're going to do this. So I built a massive lab, basically using this technology. Use Claude. It is amazing at doing this. Thanks, Larry. Claude prompted me, throughout the whole thing, guided me. I put guardrails around it. I'm like, you don't have to run commands on this system. Give me the commands. Like, I'll go run them, which was a great learning process, by the way. Like, I have more knowledge now of this environment because Claude showed me the commands. I would look at the commands. I can ask Claude, what does that command do? And so that was amazing. It's great also at when you're on a project like this. I ended up with like 18 VMs in my lab environment, and these are vulnerable targets. So I had to keep track of like 20 plus sets of credentials. And I'm like, can you just write all those credentials to a file for me so like I can reference that? And what's great about that is when I would log into something, I can just go ask Claude, hey, what are the credentials for this target, by the way? And it spits them back, which is great. And again, this is just a complete test lab, right? So I can, load the credentials into Claude. Make sure that you give it plenty of disk space up front. I ran into the issue where I ran out of disk space, and I realized I had another disk on the system that I wasn't using. And I was like, Claude, go SSH into this system because I gave it access to it. And I'm like, tell me the disk space thing. Like we need to like move some stuff around. And it mapped everything out for me, gave me all the commands, and we walked through like, all right, I'm going to back up this drive. It's like, here's the command to back it up. Here's the command to reformat it. Here's the command to move your images over to it, restart everything. Walked me through the whole thing. So I got the disk space requirement. Again, you run into these issues. And rather than me trying to remember what all the commands are, I could probably remember half of them and not the syntax to every single one. But Claude had that. But I would also prompt it like, hey, we're doing something like that could break stuff. Like go research the web and make sure that command is right. And it would modify it. And then I was like, hey, give me I need a script to interact with all this stuff. I got, 20 VMs or 17 VMs. Give me a script that gives me like a health status check that pings all of them, that lets me create snapshots and bring everything up and down, and gives me a console. So I can basically say like lab manager console, and it gives me a menu. Then I can say, I want a console on that system. And it gives me a console. So it was a great project for Claude to help kind of automate that process. So the tutorial that I linked to is very, very good. But read that tutorial first, then take that tutorial, feed it to Claude, and be like, all right, Claude, I want to go do some KVM stuff on Linux, and it will help you.
But this is also amazing. I'm sorry.
So
go ahead,
Paul, yeah, this means Claude in the cloud has access to your local hard drive and system and everything?
To a certain extent. I put guardrails around Claude. Like Claude knows I've trained it to ask me before it does anything that could modify, change something. And then, so like in my Claude, and again, this isn't great. It's still dangerous. To your point, Sam, still very dangerous.
Well, I wonder, you're not using OpenClaw, right? Because that's what most people do.
I've not set up an MC.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you've reproduced essentially the same
I do
setup.
a lot of copying and pasting commands, and Larry's like, you should just let it run wild. And I'm like, okay. I'm kind of skeptical of that.
Okay, yeah. So that means it doesn't really have access to your system. It gives you commands and you execute them.
But if it needs to run like a read-only operation, it'll ask me, because I have it prompt me before it runs any command. It'll ask me, and I'm like, you can go run that command. That's fine.
Well, if you told it to ask for permission, how do you know it's going to obey those instructions? Those
are
just in the prompt, right?
There's definitely loopholes. There's definitely loopholes, in that process. One of the things that I started to research was because I'm running it from one system, and I'm giving it SSH access to the system that runs all my VMs. And there's some limitations there. Like it can't go get a console over SSH because of technical reasons, right? But if I were to put another agent with MCP on that system, it would be able to do that. And I'm kind of toying, with that idea. But that runs the risk, to your point, that it could blow something up. Now, again, it's my lab environment. So, like if I snapshotted it or made a complete backup of all my VMs somewhere, I would be safe. And again, this isn't production data. This is just lab data. So sometimes just having a second
Right.
copy of it gives me enough safety to do that. But also, I'm concerned from a security perspective too. If I tell it to go pull down a Git repository, there could be like prompt injection in that Git repository. So that's a concern. So there are security concerns there. It's a trade-off, 100%.
Yeah. What were you going to say,
Well, I
Mandy?
was thinking, like, say compared to a year ago, Paul, like, and what I'm hearing about what you're doing, thinking about like your personal advancement in using Claude Code and being able, it's like, man, that's so substantive to see and hear your own adaptability and the progress that you've made in using Claude Code. It's like, wow, that's in my mind, like the thinking about this and the capabilities that you yourself have allowed it or have been able to spend time doing, you've increased. I feel like it's not just your speed. It's not just the process and that, but actually your internal functioning, because you already had the dynamics. You already knew what was going on. Like, do you feel any different in your own reasoning, your rationality, and your own process of what projects can be?
Yeah, I think it's very much still like an intern that needs oversight,
Mhm.
but helps me automate certain tasks, saves me time in that I can be like, I know, like, so on my local system, I have a very, very like stringent Claude code for my local system. And like I've explicitly told it, I'm like, you're only allowed to run commands that read things. Very careful how I prompt it, even given those instructions. But I'm like, go look at all my disks. One of the disks on this system, it's almost like a challenge for Claude, right? It basically just saves me time of manually poking around. I'm like, just go look, one of my disks, I need to resize the file system. Like the disk is larger than what the file system is. And I'm like, go identify that disk. And it's like, oh, here it is. It's this one. I'm like, all right, go research on the web. How do I increase the size of the file system? But I'm like, I know there's caveats there. And so someone without experience, I guess is my point, may just like blindly turn Claude code loose, and that could end up with a really bad day. And I was like, no. I'm like, I need to back up my system first. I'm like, give me the rsync command. How do I do that again? I can never remember the syntax. It gives me that. Back up my file system, my home directory first to an external drive. And then I'm like, like what shouldn't be running? And it's like, well, you should definitely wait till your backup completes before you go start resizing your file system. I'm like, all right, what else is running on my system that I might need to like wait until I do this, right? I'm like, then go, like, I run this Linux distribution, go to the forums and look for any gotchas of people that are running these commands, right? So I think being very specific and having that knowledge helps you use the tool more effectively. If you have no idea what you're doing, if you're very new to Linux or never used it before, you could easily blow things up pretty quickly. So I'm still in the camp of experience is the best asset that you have, and be careful using these tools if you don't have that experience.
Well, Paul, I think you're really on the right track here. And this is exactly like my article number 18, I think was the most important article I've seen in a couple of weeks. Because you remember when DevSec, SecOps, DevOps came out. And there was that book called The Phoenix Project that explained how you implement DevOps.
He's awesome.
Where instead of having... Yes, so instead of having an IT team where you keep asking them to do things for you, you learn how to set up the systems you need yourself. So everybody in your company has to be a coder. And that's what Trailer Bits wrote up here. They said when they started, only 5% of the company wanted to use AI. The rest thought it was garbage. And they managed to convert the whole company to be AI native by getting everybody to do what you're doing. Consider AI to be an employee working for you, like an assistant, and rework your entire workflow, assuming you have AI to help you at every stage, and then it's actually useful. Because instead of trying to like fire people and replace them with AI, you say, here's an AI, use it to do the part of your work that is boring and repetitive and too much bother, and make it your assistant to help you. And they said, that's how you actually succeed. And I really think that's right.
I agree. And I think asking it, how do I do this safely, is a great prompt,
Yeah.
right? And this is like systems administration 101. I mean, essentially what I'm using Claude for in this context is systems administration. And like, I know how to do it safely, but I want Claude to tell me, like, in this situation, how do I use it safely? And then I'm processing that. And I'm like, need to have backups in case something goes wrong, right? Which is when you're a new systems administrator, you typically learn that the hard way. And fortunately or unfortunately in my career, I've learned that the hard way. Ask me about the time 20,000 people couldn't get email because I made an oopsie. Like, we all have those stories. We all have those battle scars. So now when we have a new tool, I'm like, yeah, I understand you could just go do all this stuff for me, but there needs to be some safeguards and controls, and we need to go. I will often find myself prompting Claude to be like, I just don't want to go do this. I want to take my time. I want to go step by step, and I want to check our work before we do. So I actually like intentionally slow down the model so that I can get my work done, because I'm like manually putting the safeguards in when I use Claude. So I don't know if that's the right approach, but that's the approach I'm taking right now.
Do you give it actual time prompts?
Well, I think
not so much time, but I'm like, almost like I know I could prompt you. You could just give me a bunch of commands and I could let you run those and see what happens. But I'm like, we're not doing that. Like, I want you to go step by step, and then I want to check and validate each step. I'm like, I don't want you to do anything. I want you to give me the commands on how to do it, and I will go test them. I often tell Claude in my Claude MD file, I'm like, do not ever try to install software yourself. I will install software for you. So when it's like, hey, I need this utility or this library, I'm like, all right, I'm going to go research that. I'm going to go install it. And then I'm going to come back to you and be like, all right, it's installed now.
Nice.
Right. And because it'll also do the thing. And it's so annoying. I need to have a global Claude configuration that, like, on Arch Linux based systems. I'm like, never try and install Python libraries in my global system configuration. Always create a virtual environment and always use that virtual environment to do anything with Python. I'm like, this is how my distro works. Don't try and do that. And so it's kind of learning how I work, where it always creates that Python virtual environment now. You can go blow stuff up in a virtual environment all you want, install all the dependencies. They can fail. They won't overlap with anything because it's in a virtual environment. So it's, you got to put your experience into it.
There have been times where I will, in my input state, like, I want you to go over this 18 times before you output, or this many, this length, this, however, whatever it is for that moment, and then force it into giving me justification, its reasoning and rationality on what was different, like what it actually did learn and adjust with doing that.
You can change the model parameter that tells it how much to think.
Mm-hmm.
In one of the Claude Code updates, there was like a low, medium, high setting as to how like deep you wanted it to research. And mine was set at medium. Then I feel like at a certain time because Claude Code updates on my system, like running an Arch-based like rolling distro, Claude Code updates every day. Like, there is someone maintaining the Claude Code package in AUR, Arch User Repository. Thank you to whoever that person or people are. And like, they're pushing out an update every day. So every day in my computer, if I have Claude Code running, I save my state and I exit all of my sessions. I update Claude Code, and then like I resume those sessions on my system. I mean, it's becoming a tool that it's just so amazing to work with on a daily basis. It helps you so much.
Well, they must be being careful with those updates, because I'm using OpenClaw, and every 2 days they update it and they keep breaking things.
Fortunately, I've not run into any heinous. But if the Claude backend breaks, I have run into situations where the Claude backend is just, and I'll prompt Claude. I'm like, dude, what's going on? And it's like, I'm like, am I out of tokens? It's like, no, you're getting a different message from the API. Like, we might be having issues. I'm like, all right, fine. I'll go do something else for a while and I'll check back in.
Well, something that happened with OpenClaw to me, which I still can't understand, is I turn off the machine, I turn it on, I ask OpenClaw, will you get my email? It says, no, I don't have your API key. I say, dude, my API key is in your config file. Look in there. It says, oh, here it is. Now, how did it even start up without looking in its own config file? How is that even possible?
It's probably not saving state each time.
But I thought it would look in the config file as part of starting up. I guess not.
So I try and end my prompts now with, like, I've done a bunch of stuff, and I'm like, all right. And it's kind of funny. So, funny side story. It'll prompt me. It's like, hey, like, I did that last thing you asked for. It's like, do you want to do something next, or do you want to call it quits for a day? And it'll be like, 12:30 on a Tuesday. And I'm like, dude, we're just getting started. And then one time I prompted it, and I was like, I pulled the Star Wars quote, and I'm like, give up now in our time of triumph? I'm like, no, we're gonna continue. Right. And then I was like, you know what? In this session, I want you to use random Star Wars quotes and keep me entertained for the entire thing. So the one that builds the lab, the session I have that builds my lab, it continues with all these funny Star Wars quips all the time. And like seemingly randomly, it'll just throw in some Star Wars reference. And I told it to do that just to keep me. I'm like, dude, get me entertained. Like, let's be lighthearted about this. And it does it, which is just, it's hilarious. It's hilarious.
Well, OpenClaw has that built in. It tries to get you, first thing it asks you is what personality do you want to have, and it saves in a file called Soul. And I totally skipped over that. I couldn't care about that garbage. I'm just all bad.
But you should take your favorite movie or sci-fi or genre and tell it to embody that dude, and it just keeps me entertained. Like, it has no value other than keeping me entertained and engaged with what it's saying, because it'll ask me do you want to continue? And if it's Star Trek, I'll be like, make it so. And then it'll start with the Star Trek quotes.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm very leery of AIs with personality. I think that way lies madness.
Yeah, it could be. It's flirting with a line for sure. That's where I draw the line. I'm like, just make some Star Wars jokes. That's the extent of what I wanted to have for personality. Is just some Star Wars jokes.
I've read all these stories about AI psychosis of people that develop relationships.
I don't want a relationship.
AI.
I just want you to make funny Star Wars. Like, when you give feedback to me, put it in the context of a funny Star Wars quote, and it does that great. And that's the extent of it. Maybe another one I'll train in martial arts or kung fu, right? And that'll be the theme. Like, each one kind of carries with it a theme, just so it can make funny quips. Yeah. And it's just for entertainment value. Yeah.
And I go back and forth, Sam. Like, there's times where I'm like, I want the personality. I definitely want it to push that edge. But I also then am very consistent in saying, I'll reiterate to it how I view it. And I will state again, like, you are, whatever. At that moment, depending on which bot or model I'm using, I'll be like, no,
it's
you
funny,
are this
Mandy,
to
my
me.
my chat GPT, which I use mostly for recipes and fixing stuff. It's kind of my use case for chat GPT. I'll be like, when I make rice in a rice cooker, just give me the examples. And the initial thing I had configured chat GPT to more of my personality. And it would talk about podcasting and cybersecurity or whatever. And then I went into the settings and I'm like, I just want you to answer the questions. I don't want you to have any personality. Well, when I prompt chat GPT, I'm like, I just want the answers, and you can tell it how in-depth the answers are. I'm like, I just want the answer. I don't want any frivolous stuff with it.
Fluff.
Just tell me how to cook rice in a rice cooker. I don't want any personality with it. If my e-bike is broken, just tell me how to fix it. Don't inject anything into that. My Claude Code sessions, which run longer, because I'm typically using that through the course of an entire day, that I'm like, all right, I need something to kind of make it a little more, because we're running really boring commands, basically. So I want a little entertainment value in that. So I tune my LLMs slightly differently.
Well, something else that I saw in my story number 7, Claude has now just added the feature to remote control your machine from the cloud.
Yeah, I've heard of this.
With
dispatch.
Something called dispatch.
Because I've done this. Yeah. I've had Claude Code running on my system locally, and I'll walk away from my computer and I'm like, I really just want to tell it to like yes or no, or because it'll ask you do you want to just do everything I just proposed? Do you want to say no and stop, or do you want to give me a prompt? It's 3 questions that it has, and I want to be able to keep it running on my computer, but I'm not at my computer. And this is a great use case for that. I think Bill and others were talking about that in our internal chat. And so I need to set that up so that I can keep things running from my phone. So that's a good one. But also Claude leaked the source code to Claude Code.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think?
Right.
Do you think they should just open source it at this point? I mean, the source is out there. Will they just open source it, or?
Well, the source code already revealed a lot of proprietary secrets, which are why Claude is so much ahead. So I understand why they didn't release it, and why they didn't want to open source it. But it is important. The part I saw was their memory model, which is really important because this is a real weak spot of the current AIs, is that the only way they don't remember anything is to just keep making the prompt longer and longer and longer by improving all your including all your previous history. So before long, it hits the max, and then it starts compressing it and forgetting things. And they have a smarter system where it stores a lookup table to files, and then it uses grep to only pull the relevant information for each query. So the memory is much more complete and it doesn't get compacted and
interesting,
corrupted.
because I will tell Claude to save things to memory, right? So I'll feed it documentation. And I'm like, read all this documentation and save this to your memory. So in this chat, we always have access to all of those memories. And it does that amazingly well. And that explains it.
Right, and the other models do that in an incredibly foolish way by putting all that in front of every prompt. So you really can't do much of it before you've used up all your space. So this is essentially built-in retrieval
and it does that
generation.
in files too. Yeah, because sometimes I'll tell it to save it to a different file. I'm like, I want to do this work, and everything you learn, I want to save it in a separate file, so it can go back to it.
And OpenAI just added cloud storage to their system, so you can store files in their cloud and then refer to them in your questions. And of course, Office 365 has had that all along. With Copilot can look in your files, but they're all coming up with different ways of doing this. And I think it's good to see them competing, so we can figure out what's best.
One of the things I'll do on my lab is I'll prompt it with a specific vulnerability, and I'll be like, "Hey, there's a new CVE." I'm like, "Do we have this in our lab?" And it's like, yes. I'm like, all right, what do we need to do to set up so it's vulnerable? And I'm like, what threat actors are exploiting it? What IOCs do we have? Are there any public exploits? And then I'm like, save all that to a separate file. I'm like, let's keep that memory going in this separate file. So as new information comes along, or we work on stuff, maybe we develop an exploit or a scanner for it, we'll just save all those memories to that file. So we always have access to those memories. And I did that with my story number 1, the big IP APM vulnerability, which is a fascinating journey of a vulnerability. And why I have so much information about this, because I've been following this one very closely, almost like a use case for my lab and Claude usage. But so here's the things I learned about CVE 2025-53521. One of the most interesting aspects is this came from the big IP or F5 breach last October. And if you remember, they had a year-long breach that they discovered. And as a result of that, threat actors gained access to vulnerabilities that had not been disclosed. There was about 40 plus of those vulnerabilities. Now, all of those vulnerabilities required authentication. 2025-53-521 was one of them. It was deemed a denial of service classification in October. Now, recently, it was upgraded to, I think, a 9.8. I think I can hover and get that. 9.3 critical on the CVSS v4.0 scale. It was upgraded to a 9.3 because even though so it was upgraded to an unauthenticated remote code execution vulnerability. Oh, well, now the stakes change, right? That's a huge difference between something that's authenticated in a denial of service condition to something that is not authenticated, unauthenticated, remote code execution. Complete game changer now. And so...
How did they do that upgrade?
I think they updated the record. So...
They just found a different version of the attack.
So what they found was threat actors exploiting it. So I think through a forensics incident response investigation, they uncurled that and unfurled that and said, "Oh, that this is not the same vulnerability as we classified before. So some other things I learned, Big IP is really just a Linux box. One of my test systems on an older version is CentOS 7 with Linux kernel 3 something, which is interesting. The APM is an access policy manager. It's like a zero trust feature that has to be enabled to be vulnerable to this, which involves several steps because I prompted Claude. So here's the wonderful thing about Claude when I'm setting up a vulnerability lab with all these different products from all these different manufacturers. It's very time consuming to be an expert in every single SonicWall, Fortinet, F5, Citrix platform. And I'm like, well, I don't need to be an expert. Claude needs to be an expert and tell me how to configure it. So I'm like, hey, Claude, got this new CVE. Tell me about this feature. How do I enable it to be vulnerable? And it actually gets excited. It's like, ooh, Paul, we have this in the lab. We can configure this to be vulnerable. I'm like, make it so. Let's do that. And it gives me all the commands to enable that. Now, do they all work? No, it's a little back and forth. Go research on the web. Do I need to reboot it? Do I need to license? The first problem was it wasn't licensed, so I had to pull a trial license. Once I got it licensed, I was able to implement the feature, which was awesome because now I have a vulnerable instance in the lab. Now, the IOCs were published by F5, so now we have IOCs for this particular vulnerability. And it's interesting that when I talk with people when this F5 thing was released, it was a big deal. A lot of people classified this and was like, well, these are all require authentication, so we're not prioritizing the fixes. Like, that strategy doesn't work anymore because the threat actors are going to go research all these vulnerabilities and figure out which ones they can exploit, as we see in this case. UNC 5221 was the threat actor group, Chinese-based threat actors that were attributed to the breach of F5. What's interesting is I couldn't find evidence linking UNC 5221 to exploiting this now remote code execution vulnerability in F5. Strong evidence that it's the same group, like circumstantial evidence, but there's no hard evidence that links it. So F5 did a great job publishing the IOCs. I would have liked to have a malware sample because I think this could have been a Brickstorm malware, which is attributed to UNC 5221, but we don't have any evidence of that. So, and again, it was largely AI that helped me figure out what the attack paths were. And actually, in a first pass, was like, oh, it's UNC 5221. I'm like, is there any evidence that they're exploiting this particular vulnerability, the updated one? And it's like, oh, no. There's no hard evidence to that. So I had to like really push it to give me more accurate information. And then, links to the resources and the reports and reviewing those help me with that. So
when it says that, like whenever it asks, or when you ask and it says that, no, there's no known exploits, like, do you trust it?
If I ask it for public exploits, not really.
Okay.
There's lots of sources for exploits. I think you got to really prompt it better to get a better understanding of if there are any public exploits. It's decent at that, Mandy. Decent. I have in my internal app one of the ways I do that is I query the GitHub API and I search for the CVE in the GitHub API, which returns any repositories that have that CVE referenced in the GitHub API. Now, GitHub API also has limitations like API limits, so you can't rely on that. So I actually vibe coded a way to get around some of those limits and be able to query the GitHub API in a more thorough manner. I still don't trust it. One of the false positives it will throw that I got to work on next is some people on GitHub will put up a repository with the CVE number as like the repository name and just put a README file there that just describes the vulnerability. In my code right now, we'll say that's an exploit because there's a GitHub repository that references the CVE. It goes, there's an exploit. And I'm like, that's not really an exploit. So now I have to like retrain it and code it to differentiate between if there's just I think it's as simple as if there's just a README file, it's not an exploit. Do I want you to exclude that result? No, but I don't want you to classify it as an exploit. If there's any code associated with it, then I want you to call it an exploit. And even then, it could not be an exploit. It could just be a scanning tool that identifies the vulnerability. So there's some work I have to do there.
An LLM should be able to tell if it's an exploit by reading it and understanding it.
Correct. Then I had to burn some LLM tokens to do that, which would probably be a good usage of those tokens. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, analyze the source code. Tell me, is this an exploit or something just scans for it? It could totally do that. It burned through some tokens, but maybe worth it.
Yep. And speaking of GitHub, I saw my story number 10. GitHub has now added AI-powered bug detection to their scanning of GitHub. This is the kind of thing we were saying we're going to need. We need to find these vulnerabilities faster, and they're going to have an AI-built bug scanner inside GitHub that you can turn on, which will search for things like secrets
and that's great.
And so on.
That is
and
so
automatically
cool.
and give you Copilot recommendations to patch them.
I'm so happy on that. Yeah,
we're going to need our software.
I feel like that's one of the biggest pushes for the last 10 or 15 years is to get to having situations like this.
Yep.
Yeah. Even just detecting the secrets would be nice. And did you see the Watchtower one by Story 15? Because I thought this was pretty impressive.
Was this the Citrix?
In retrospect, I should have seen.
Write-up?
No. What it is they found software products that reach out for updates to Amazon repositories that have gone down.
Oh.
And they just bought them and registered them, and now the installed software takes updates from them. And they found 8 million requests from military, government, big corporations. This is actually, I can see this is something that people do all the time. And,
we covered. This
this
is from February. We covered this one, but this is.
Well, that was from February. I didn't. Okay, the thing that occurred to me is the flaw here. I think this is an Amazon problem. Once they lease somebody a repository, they should never use it again. You should not be able to buy a repository somebody else used previously.
They should destroy it.
There seems to be an
this
error
would
like
fix
making
the problem, Sam. 100%.
Yeah. It seems to me like this is like when Amazon first came out with Amazon Cloud Storage, it was world readable by default, and that got a whole bunch of people. They should just change it so by default, once you quit using a repository, that exact number can't be leased out again to anybody
they
else.
run into a namespace problem, but they just got to make sure their namespace is robust enough and has enough namespace to support that, right?
It already looks pretty long. I think it's like 10 or 15 digits in that.
So they should have enough namespace in order to do that. I mean, I guess the compromise is making it configurable by the user, but then you're left to the user. Like, if you decommission an Amazon asset, you should at least have the option to say, like, destroy this and don't ever let it be used ever again. But if you make it optional, then not everyone's going to select that. Making it the default is the way to go in just dealing with the namespace issue.
Yeah. Should we talk about TryHackMe?
Yeah, what's going on with TryHackMe? I don't use the TryHack. I've used Pen Test Academy in the past, which is really good. But then, I like having my own vulnerability lab, which, again, used to be a lot of work. Now with Claude is a lot less work to stand up yourself, but still takes some work to set up. So having these platforms that you can sign up for, like TryHackMe, they give you labs to go exploit things and play around with malware, I'm assuming, and do all the things is a good thing. But TryHackMe had some controversy lately.
Yeah. Well, TryHackMe and National Cyber League are the ones that are best for beginners, college students, because they have instructions and they spin up a VM and you can practice hacking into it. But what they did was they told all their customers, we are not using your data to train an AI. And then they did record everybody's data for 7 years and train an AI on what real hackers do to penetrate in, which, by the way, is pretty valuable data, and then release a commercial product. So they've now released this thing called NowSecure, an AI-powered penetration tester, trained on 7 years of user behavior data, which is probably a way to make money, but they lied to all their customers, so their customers are all getting mad and rage quitting.
Yeah, but is that, but it's not PII at that point. It's just analyzing your behavior.
You could say that,
and training a model based on that.
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side, they should have
Yeah.
told you that they're doing that.
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of like recording your gameplay in a game.
Yeah, right.
Because you're
Right.
just inside some box trying to get a flag, just executing
I mean, they
commands
could
or
have made it
something.
an opt-in. They could have incentivized the opt-in and said, look, if you give us access to your anonymized data from using this platform, by the way, we're going to give you a 80% discount on our new pen testing tool that we're going to, make on that. If they were transparent, again,
Well, but they
transparency
said that.
goes a whole...
The founder said, I mean, his statement was, they said that the users whose data was being used were contacted and they gave explicit permission, that the data usage is selective, and if you weren't contacted, your data wasn't used.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, well, if that's true, that's good.
Yeah.
I mean,
I would
that's
like
good.
an incentive,
People-
right? I would like hey, if I use your data, we'll give you a discount on the product we're building on it. Like, that would have gone a long way. Or even a free trial. Like, hey, we use your data. For 90 days, you can use our pen test product. And if you buy it, I'll give you a 25% discount on using our service because you helped build it.
I'm
right?
finding that interesting.
Again,
That's a good,
incentives and motivations, right? Like,
I mean, I'm all for that, but I guess like my take was I kind of would have expected this was going on anyway. Like I wouldn't have, I figure it's similar to any other training situation, like that they're going to use the data in other ways. And as a business, I can completely see why they would go, oh, well, if we can make this much more money using this AI pen tester, like why wouldn't they have done that? So I guess in my mind, I would have already kind of gone, yeah, that figures.
right. Yeah, I wouldn't be. I mean, I think the issue is they weren't transparent and upfront with it, or maybe not enough, right? Maybe it wasn't clear enough to the users that, hey, we are going to use your, and it's not even really using your data. We're going to train a model based on your behaviors, essentially, which I mean makes sense. I mean, they probably have a pretty good AI pen testing tool based on all
Absolutely. I will say I like the
Right.
name.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, the point of this article is one I agree with, and I've argued with my more idealistic students about this. The fact is, if it's useful and you're learning something, you can tolerate with them being kind of lying bums.
This is true.
The people don't have to be perfectly moral
But
for you to make a deal
Everyone,
with
they
them.
only
everyone
use the
benefited,
data-
right? I paid for a service. I benefited from that service. And if the service has the benefit from my anonymized data, again, they're not pulling my personal information. To me, that's kind of, whatever.
Well, and if what their statement they made is true, that if it was only those they contacted that they used that data,
Right.
it's a moot point.
Yeah, then maybe they didn't do
Right.
anything wrong at all. And that's the issue. But the main thing is, if you're using it to learn, it doesn't really matter whether they're doing small things wrong or not to you. And I remember I had a student, I got him a job, and he was working for this social media network. And he said, I think these guys are Israeli spies. They're contacting American security experts and putting them in a network connected to the Israeli military. And I said, dude, at your level, the only question is, do the paychecks bounce? You're not telling you to break the law, and the paychecks don't bounce. That kind of thing is above your pay grade. Don't worry about it. But I couldn't convince him. He rage quit on the grounds that they must be immoral, you know.
One thing I did rage quit, speaking of that, is Trivy. Did you guys see this story?
I didn't read
I
it.
saw some stories about it, but I didn't
No.
really
Yeah,
understand.
go ahead.
What
So
is Trivy
Trivy
anyway?
is like a vuln scanner for your Docker containers. And I actually had it installed on my system because I do supply chain stuff in my day job. And it was kind of like a supply chain for your Docker container thing. And those that have listened to the show know like I'm big on Docker and Docker containers and stuff like that. But the Trivy succumbed to a supply chain attack where their GitHub Actions repo was attacked. It's for the second time, by the way, March 19th through the 20th. And through that supply chain attack, they were able to steal credentials to other people's GitHub repos. They deployed info stealers, dumped memory, harvested SSH keys. 10,000 plus GitHub Action workflows were referencing the vulnerable Trivy version. So Trivy is like something you would download into your CI/CD pipeline and then run, giving it access to your Docker containers in your pipeline. So they were harvesting all of those. So then the shiny hunters used credentials from that to breach Cisco. They cloned 300 private Cisco GitHub repos, including source code for Cisco's AI Assistant, AI Defense. Downstream exposure also includes repos from major banks, U.S. government agencies. So as a result, so what I did was I removed Trivy from all my systems as a precaution. I didn't have it linked to any of my GitHub actions. I was just using it. You can use it as a local tool. You can basically point it at a Docker container, and it gives you basically a supply chain kind of report. There's better tools from that. I want to say our friend Josh Bressers works for Anchor. They have tools that do that too that I use that are awesome. But I was testing out Trivy at some point, had it on my system, so I removed it. But again, it was a local scanning tool. The Cisco source code release is interesting. It remains to be seen what they got in terms of source code from Cisco. Internal sources tell me that it was nothing like really interesting. That the source code for iOS, iOS XE, NXOS, and the like was not in those GitHub repos, that it was other Cisco source code. But I mean, until we know exactly the extent of the damages, we won't know what was compromised. But our gut feeling is it's nothing juicy and good from Cisco.
So did Trivy do something particularly wrong to have this happen, or did just somebody get an API key?
I think it was
somewhere?
an API key, or they inserted themselves as a developer. I forget what the initial infection vector was.
It says their first containment was incomplete. They rotated secrets and tokens, but the process wasn't atomic, and attackers may have been privy to refresh tokens.
Yeah, it was token reuse or token stealing, from what I read. It was Aqua Security is the ones that maintain Trivy as an open source project. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I think it was Marshall's got hacked. The credit cards got leaked many years ago, and I thought it's probably safer to shop there than anywhere else because they've now actually had to upgrade their security once. The other people are probably still doing stupid things. So I wonder if, rage quitting them after they get hacked might be the right move. Might be the wrong move, I mean. They might actually be more secure now that they've been embarrassed.
Yeah, I did an interview with that on the CISO of Clorox whenever it got breached, and that's what she said too. It was like, it's completely secure.
Yeah, so I wonder.
And
I think studies have shown this, like when companies that do get hacked, their stock usually does not really suffer, except for a few days. Then people forget about it and carry on, which I think is rational, because the fact that you got hacked doesn't really mean you're more vulnerable than everybody else, not unless you did something really unusually stupid. It's probably just the luck of the draw that we found out you got hacked. Probably all the other guys got hacked and they don't even know it yet.
It could be, with as many alternatives as there are to, looking at Docker containers, it could be detrimental to Aquasec, which is the company I really like. I mean, we tracked them years ago when we started like Application Security Weekly, Enterprise Security Weekly, and we tracked them pretty closely. So it's kind of interesting. Again, I also do like the tools from Anchor and Josh Bresser's team as well. And there's just so many tools for analyzing what's in your Docker containers. Again, kind of going back to Claude Code, I tell it specifically when it creates Docker containers to use the public free chain guard. I think it's chain guard containers, which chain guard goes through and tries to wipe out as many CVEs as possible. So if you build off a chain guard's containers, you end up with a container that basically has 0 CVEs in all their libraries, everything. Like there's literally like almost 0 CVEs or security issues with their containers. And knowing that container ecosystem, I'm hyper aware of that if you don't build the Docker container yourself and you're relying on someone else's image, it usually contains vulnerabilities unless you get them from a trusted source. Like I'll plug ChainGuard with no affiliation with them, and they're not a sponsor or anything, but they make awesome containers. And then I'll prompt Claude. I'm like, I want you to start with this container, and I'll even prompt it like, I'm hyper aware of security. I don't want you building Docker containers that have a bunch of vulnerabilities. And it's like, okay, we can use this one. And I'm like, what's their Python one? It's like the free one is I guess if you pay, you can get like other versions of Python, but the free one, you can use like the latest version of Python. So I'm like, okay, I'm like build on that and we'll keep that updated. And then I'll tell it every once in a while, like go pull the latest Docker container from ChainGuard and upgrade all of our stuff. And if there's code that needs to be fixed because of a library dependency, I'm like, go fix that, which was a manual process before. Like when I was maintaining PBWorks, I would manually do that. I go upgrade all of our, containers and Python libraries, and then a bunch of stuff would break, and then I would go manually through the code and go fix it. Now Claude can help me with that whole process, which is great.
No, that's great. This reminds me, I've been seeing a lot of news articles about how Docker is now out of date. There's some new alternative thing we should all be using, which I haven't looked into.
Oh, interesting. I mean, yeah, as technology evolves, right, there's obviously going to be alternatives.
Yeah.
I like Docker because it's so well documented, and there's so much information that like an AI assistant can pull from that I'm like, anytime I have a project, I'm like, okay, now just put it in Docker. Like, create me a plan to put this in Docker. What do you got? And then puts it in Docker, and it works.
Yeah.
Is a CVE blocking feature on the ChainGuard like their reason for being, or is it just something that
that's they're like a software supply chain company. Yeah. And a lot of commercial companies use them. If your product is using Docker or Kubernetes, right, you would go to ChainGuard and even buy a license from them and know that it saves you a bunch of work, right? Like you're getting already pre-secured, air quote secured Docker containers from them.
Mm-hmm.
And they get some free advertising, which is great because, by the way, they have a community version that works. I use it. It works great. It saves me a lot of work, right?
Good.
Paul, I want to go into your story 3 about the bus factor.
Yeah. So this is, it's kind of morbid, right? Like,
yes.
I was talking to like one of my like pseudo cousins. There was like this great story when I was working in the early 2000s and like the .com era, where we had like 4 cubicles. Cubicles are arranged in a workspace, and sometimes they clump them in like clusters of 4, right? So it's like a grid, like a box. And I had one cubicle. Next to me was my brother-in-law, who's also one of my best friends growing up. So I married his sister, right? So he's next to me, and then his first cousin was the cubicle adjacent to me, and we were working in a very, very, very different time back then. So we would work like really long hours, and then we would get to work, and it was like release day, and we would go to lunch and have like massive amounts of drinks and stuff. It was very different. We would blast music. I mean, I could tell you stories till the cows come home about that working environment. It was amazing. So working in corporate America, we would always have this thing like, what if someone got hit by a bus, right? That was always like a thing that we would talk about, and it's very morbid, right? Like if someone had
more morbid than
right,
that,
like if someone had this institutional knowledge, we were like, well, what if so and so were to get hit by a bus? Like, would we be totally screwed, or has that person shared knowledge? And it's also like that thing I learned kind of growing up in tech was like, never be that bottleneck. Always share your knowledge, train people, train yourself out of a job. I've talked about this on the show before. I haven't talked about it in a long time, but train yourself out of a job, right? If you do something really well, train other people how to build, maintain, configure, set up, whatever you're doing. And then management will look upon that favorably and give you the next thing. So never be like the choke point where if you get hit by a bus, everything would fall to pieces. And so apparently there's an open source. They use this as a metric for open source, and it's called the bus factor. And it's like, how many people would need to be hit by a bus to cause catastrophic impact to the project? And I think it was JetBrains. I'm familiar with JetBrains. They make actually really great software for development, SDLC developers, IDEs, the whole thing. I've used their products in the past. Great products. And so the bus factor is the minimum number of key contributors who would need to suddenly disappear from a project before it stalls or fails due to loss of critical knowledge. So the bus factor is the lower the number, the higher the risk. Like if someone were to be hit by a bus. I don't know why we always said someone would be hit by a bus. I think I've actually been in meetings and tried to explore this concept. Like in any case, so they did research on popular open source projects. So like MongoDB's bus factor is 7. So like basically 7 people need to be hit by a bus in order to cause that stall or, impact to the project. When you get to MySQL, PostgreSQL, and SQLite, I use SQLite in a lot of my Claude vibe coded projects. They all sit at a bus factor of 2, classified as high risk or siloed. So basically 2 people need to be hit by a bus. I hate saying that because it's very morbid, but 2 people. So removing the top 2 contributors from MySQL to SQLite results in 100% loss of functional directories, storage engines, SQL parsers. And this article kind of explores in open source world the who is at the highest risk according to the bus factor, which they didn't explore some of the like weird use cases, because I've heard over the years that like NTP, there's like one person whose passion is maintaining NTP, like network time protocol code is like one person, right? And we all know the classic meme where it's this complex like Rutabaker, what do they call that machine with the multiple parts? Rube Goldberg, thank you. Rube Goldberg machine, right? And it's got the one little piece, and it's like this is the one person that maintains that open source project that if it fails, the entire internet or would crumble. And that's what this article is speaking to. And it plays into security. They talk about XZ, right? What happens when threat actors take over a project that there's 1 or 2 core maintainers and are able to inject code. XZ was a classic, amazing story on that front. So my comment on this basically is we live in a fragile world of open source. But what's interesting to me, and I use a lot of open source software. Obviously, everyone knows I run Linux on my desktop and wear the t-shirts and use Arch, by the way, the whole thing. There was a lot of controversy in the Manjaro Linux project. I run Manjaro on several of my computers, and I noticed that at one point, like updates were lagging, like major updates. I'm like, I haven't gotten a major update in a while. I'm like, but everything's working. Like I can get my software from the Arch user repository. If I run into a bug, I can still troubleshoot it. I can fix it. Apparently, there's a commercial entity associated with Manjaro that they were in like disagreement with the community contributors. The community contributors are pushing for certain things. The commercial person, who I believe lives in Germany, that has a partner, so there's like a company that makes money on it, they were pushing back on a lot of those changes. And I think where we stand today is the community kind of won, and they're going to split, and Manjaro is going to be a community supported project, and the commercial entity is going to kind of operate separately. And they're talking about legally, how do we separate trademarks and operating capabilities? I had no idea this was happening till I heard it on a podcast. As a Manjaro user, I think the power of Linux is we can overcome these challenges. It's highly configurable. There's a lot of components that come from a lot of different sources. Even your distribution maintainers have a piece of that puzzle. And I was able to go on with life and really not notice anything going wrong in my systems. And I think that's a testament to the Linux. Now, it's a double-edged sword, right? We have a lot of these components, and one of these components that's vulnerable or is taken over or falls off the planet, or again, the bus factor, we could be in a bad situation. But it's also very resilient because there's a community behind all of these projects, and it's all open source and interoperable with each other. We can, as users, fix all of those issues. So I don't know.
Well, now you can fix
Now you can
everything
fix everything
with Claude.
Claude's a great help for that, right? And I think, Larry pointed out our internal chat, right? Something that I've been noodling on. And, he pointed to this one like really inexpensive Wi-Fi dongle that someone tried to get working with Linux, ran into a whole bunch of issues, had to do a whole bunch of research, but eventually got it working. And Larry's take was, well, this is why Linux isn't ready for the desktop. I'm like, but also, this is why Linux is so powerful, because if something doesn't work, we can make it work because we have freedom and liberties within Linux. It's not just that it's free in terms of like just free, open, I can download it free, but it's open and we can change and modify and do with what we want with it. And that's the freedom, the Libre in the free open source, free Libre open source moniker of floss, right? It's that I have freedoms, I have liberties to do whatever I want with the software. And to me, that's super important. And I think it's a huge testament to the power of Linux, also a detriment. But I think the detriment is the manufacturer of that dongle could have chosen to support Linux, but they chose not to, right? So I think it's the manufacturers that we need to push on to be like, you need to support this. And supporting this, again, that's one of the downsides of Linux and open source is supporting it. You're not just supporting it on Linux. Which distribution are you supporting? Which kernel version are you supporting? Which libraries are you supporting? It's that freedom and liberties that works as a detriment when a company wants to have something that they support. Linus Torvalds has talked about this, right? Like the downfall of Linux on the desktop is not Linux or the kernel itself. It's the number of different ways that we can package software for the millions of distributions that we have out there that is all different. And if you want to produce one piece of software for Linux, it's a nightmare and it's a headache. So it's my open source moment here on Paul's Security Weekly.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit of morbidity to this whole mess thing. But there was a time period where I actually drove a teacher to her job back and forth because she had been hit by a bus and the wheels had run over her head.
Ooh.
And she lived, but she was understandably not keen on driving or being like around anything. But I was like, wow, she actually was hit by a bus. That's horrible.
It's horrible. Stay clear of buses.
Yeah.
Especially if you're maintaining open source software. So I'm just saying,
exactly.
Stay clear of.
If you're chilling at SQLite, just stay away from buses.
Stay away. And if those two people should never be on the same airplane or
not
anything like that,
right, no.
don't do that.
Don't go outside.
Ride in the same car, right? Like,
like, definitely not.
Good Lord.
Well, on a lighter note, I might as well mention my story 13 about Zoom.
No,
I've already talked about this one. There's an AI company. There's an AI company that makes podcasts. And what they do is through some procedure that hasn't been entirely understood, they scrape the web, they find Zoom meetings, they send a bot to join the Zoom meeting, they record it with a browser extension, so it doesn't matter whether you have Zoom recording on or not, and then they turn it into a podcast, all without telling
public,
you. And then they send you an email saying,
Zoom
hey,
meetings?
Well, no, they don't check for that. So a bunch of them, they thought were private Zoom meetings, but they had a public URL, and they sent them an email saying, hey, your podcast is featured on, your Zoom meeting was featured on this podcast.
Because the Zoom URL will have the password in it.
People say, wait a minute.
So you can join it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why. So there must be Zoom meetings where you allowed public to join, but they didn't intend to record it.
Or it's a private Zoom meeting and somehow the URL became public and the URL has the passcode in it so anyone can join.
Yeah. Yeah, and this reminds me of the old rule from like MySpace: never put anything on the internet that you don't want the whole world to know.
Also, be mindful of who's joining your meeting, because you would see someone conceivably you would see someone joining your Zoom meeting.
Yeah, but I think if you turn off the recording in Zoom, some people imagine that means they're not recording you,
right?
And of course, that's not true because they could record it other ways.
So they were making podcasts from the Zoom meeting. I mean, I could see that for like public. Like when your city or town has a town hall or a meeting, they have a Zoom component. And if that's public anyway, turning that into podcast is actually a great service, right? If you weren't at the meeting, you can consume that as a podcast.
Sure. as long as the people
You have
involved
to agree
know
to
that
it.
and
I
agree
agree.
to it.
Yeah,
Yes.
this is really super shady that
Yeah.
they're just turning red.
And you have to inform all the attendees
Yeah.
this meeting is being recorded.
Is that a violation of federal wiretapping? Yeah,
Seems
that's like a
it should
legal
be, something
question.
like
I would
that.
I
Yeah.
would ask a legal.
And like if there's a minor in there,
Huge,
I bet it's a
yeah,
huge
yeah.
legal issue.
I know we used to talk about that back in the day
these
with
guys-
recording phone calls.
Yeah.
And the answer I actually took a class on securing VoIP, and we talked about this. I think it was with Eric Cole, actually, who was an amazing cybersecurity practitioner and figuring out an industry. And a fantastic instructor. It was a great, it was years ago, but it was a great class. And one of the things we did talk about, and Eric being of course, very smart individual, extremely intelligent, was like, it largely depends on the state laws, and it gets kind of wonky. Like if you're in one state, the person's in the other state, and you want to record the call, do you have to tell them or not? And can you record the call? It depends on how you flesh out the laws in each. So there's federal regulations, I'm sure, and then there's state regulations. And so the answer is like, it depends. And I'm wondering how that applies to virtual calls on the internet. We were talking in the context of VoIP, so I'm assuming it would apply to these Zoom meetings.
Yeah, these guys could definitely be embroiled in a lot of lawsuits.
Oh, one last story I wanted to hit before we wrap up is my story number 9. 0 days in electronic motorcycles are a security nightmare. This is everyone should read this article because it's absolutely fascinating. The first part of this article is just so interesting. It'll make you do all kinds of research into chemistry and safety. And so they electronic motorcycles are very expensive, right? And so not like e-bikes. When you buy an e-motorcycle that can go over 60 miles an hour, let's say, I looked into these back in the day. They're very expensive, over $20,000, let's say. And they're like, well, we didn't necessarily have the budget to go buy an e-motorcycle to test its security, but you can buy just the control board. And so they contacted the vendor that makes the motorcycles, and they're like, well, we just want to buy a control board. And they're like, yeah, sure. They're like, just give us your VIN number of your vehicle and we'll happily sell you a control board. And they're like, well, we don't have a motorcycle. We just want to buy the control board. The company's like, no, not going to sell it to you. So then they're like, well, we went to eBay, and it turns out for roughly the same price we could buy it from the manufacturer, we can buy a control board off eBay. So they bought one, but it was the PCBs were encased in polyurethane, epoxy, or silicone. Now, it's difficult to tell. Like I get this. Like I get a board, and it's got this clear coating over the PCB, and then you're like, how do I remove that? Well, I never thought about this as much as these folks went into, but it depends, like how you remove that. They called it depotting, is the process of removing these materials from the PCB. If it's polyurethane, epoxy, or silicone, greatly determines your process for removing that material safely from the PCB. And by safely, I mean not damaging the electronics, but also safely, meaning you're not killing yourself or hurting yourself in a significant way, breathing the fumes from the chemicals you need to dissolve those, which are different depending on which type of material encapsulated that PCB. So that part was, I thought, absolutely fascinating, and I would have to do like much more research to like fully understand the process. I've watched other videos on how they do that, and all of them. I just want to caution our readers and listeners and watchers of this podcast: do not attempt to do this on your own. It is very, very dangerous. And like I said, I've seen other videos where they've done this. The chemicals are super, super dangerous, and you can cause serious physical harm to yourself or others around you if you're not doing it properly, if you don't know what you're doing, if it's not in a well-ventilated space. All of that aside, I'm just cautioning you, like, don't do this. Don't say, I heard it on Paul Security Weekly, I want to go try, melting the stuff off my PCB with chemicals, because it's a very dangerous process. Spoiler alert, though, they failed on this process from their PCB they bought from eBay, and just reverse engineered the Android app and got the download for the firmware. Much safer way to do analysis of the device. It ended up having some findings that are in my story number 9. So
I like the part where they checked the specifications for the Android app, and it says, "Don't worry,
Right.
this app can't be hacked."
Yeah.
Oh well, that's the end of it.
Go back to our sponsor, NowSecure, right? We touched on that interview with Pancake, right? Like, people make very insecure apps. So, and I was glad no one got hurt in the making of that article, by the way. So,
yeah, boy, and a motorcycle controlled by an Android app.
Yeah,
that already sounds like a really bad idea.
Because they're all smart. Yeah, a lot of my smart devices have you Bluetooth paired to your device, and you can control it. So, alrighty. Well, we're
Android
slightly
apps
Android apps are yep,
so easy to hack.
Yep. Well, thank you everyone for listening and watching this edition of Paul Security Weekly. That'll conclude. We'll see everyone next week, and over and out.